Cunningham.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. It is a privilege to have the opportunity to respond to the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition on the Centenary of ANZAC commemorations that have been held across the nation and indeed internationally last month. Like many individual Australians, for me it is a time of reflection on the service and sacrifice of so many Australians and their families as a result of the intensity and devastation that First Great World War wrought on them as individuals, as families and as communities. It's a time to reflect on the profound impact that war and the Gallipoli campaign in particular had on shaping the character and values of a young Australian nation. It is not, and never should be, a time for celebrating or glorifying war, and this is not what you hear from the words in services, the conversations of community members attending them, or the activities that occur on these occasions. The Anzacs left us a legacy of service to others, of sacrifice for mates, of the hope for peace, and a rejection, indeed, of pomp and bluster. We come together to not only pay respect to their courage and service, but also to honour their legacy and recommit to those values. As the mother of young men, I feel particularly moved by the individual stories that we hear at this time, of young men kissing their families farewell as they set off, believing they were off to the adventure of a lifetime, or solemnly determined to do their duty to their young nation, or simply to support other mates who were signing up. Their motivations were diverse, but there is little doubt that the vast majority would never have anticipated the extent of the death, destruction and suffering they would encounter. Many made the ultimate sacrifice on those bloody battlefields, and they never returned to the families that hoped to see them come home. Many families stood at train stations around the nation to collect and embrace relatives returning with devastating injuries, suffering from being gassed, or trying to manage the psychological impacts that would live with them for a lifetime. It's no wonder that many families report that those returning were extremely reluctant to ever discuss what they had witnessed. In the Illawarra, we began the centenary events last year with a wonderful first service for 100 years of ANZAC at the Balgownie World War I Memorial. Richard Davis did a warm welcome to country and also acknowledged, as we importantly can in the days now where we're doing much better at finding the information, the service of Aboriginal diggers. Mark Edwell gave us the history of the Remembrance Tree and the memorial. Marie Austin represented the descendants in talking about her two great-uncles on the memorial, one of whom died and the other returned. And I have to say I also have a great-great-uncle listed on that memorial, James Young. We were all thrilled to have the State Governor, Her Excellency Professor the Honourable Marie Bashir, ADCVO, to provide the formal address, and she was warmly received by all. The ceremony was concluded by Major General Horry Howard, AO, MC, ESM, retired, doing the ode. And lots of local schools were there, the Army Band, B Company, 4th, 3rd Battalion, RNSWR, who provided the catafalque party. And I have to say it was pleasing that some of the restoration work on the memorial was actually assisted by one of the grants I was able to secure for them under the local grants program. On the 13th of March, it was an honour to participate in a ceremony at the Wollongong Botanic Gardens, organised by the City of Wollongong RSL sub-branch, where we planted a sapling that is a cutting from the original pine tree from the battlefields of Lone Pine, Gallipoli Peninsula. The ceremony included an introduction to the Centenary ANZAC torch, and it was very well attended with lots of school children there as well. On Sunday the 19th of April, I attended the Bundeena and Mainbar ANZAC Centenary March and Service. This was also strongly supported by hundreds of locals turning out, and there were excellent contributions from everybody involved, including the Bundeena Public School students. Given the tough year that has been caused by the fire at the RSL Club and sub-branch, they did a magnificent job for the very important occasion and had also received a local grants program ANZAC Centenary contribution. Another aspect of the grants program I was very pleased to support was the provision of funding to local schools for special commemorations. This included St Therese Catholic Primary School for a World War I memorial, Corrimal Primary School for refurbishing an existing war memorial and putting in a new mosaic, Wollongong West Public School to establish a memorial garden and to install a plaque, and Parramatta School to develop a resource on World War I for students with a disability. On the 24th of April, I attended the unveiling of a wonderful ANZAC Centenary commemorative plaque at St Bridget's Catholic School at Gwynville. And the students did a great service, and we heard from Joe Davison from the Wollongong RSL. The dedication of so many local students to the task of researching and retelling the stories of their own family members has indeed inspired me to talk to my family. And I'd just like to briefly refer to two of my own family members. My maternal grandmother's uncle, James Wallace Young, was born in Scotland and he emigrated to Australia in 1914. He enlisted in November 1916 and served in the 1st Battalion E Company of the AIF in France. He was wounded twice in battle, firstly in May 1917 and again in October that year. He returned home, but the effects of being gassed had an ongoing impact on him for the rest of his life. And here's the gentleman on the Balgownie Memorial I mentioned earlier. The other relatives are Edward Harold Stafford, known as Harry, who lived with my great-great-grandmother, Matilda Kelly, at Balgownie. Harry was working at the local mine until he enlisted at the age of 18 in August 1917. He embarked with the 2nd Tunnelling Company from Melbourne in November 1917 and served on the Western Front. The records show he was in Suez, Egypt in December 1917. He was gassed on the 1st of June 1918 and admitted to a military hospital again in February 1919. He returned to Australia in September 1919 and was discharged in October. The Stafford family, like many of their neighbours, had lost members in the terrible Mount Kembla mining disaster of 1902 that took the lives of 96 men and boys from the small mining communities of the local area. And indeed 3 of the Stafford family had died in that mining explosion. Just over 10 years later, that small community again saw many of their young men off to World War I. Like communities across the nations, it took a large toll on what were small populations at the time. The same would have been felt, for example, in the communities around Bulli in my area, who had lost 81 men and boys in the Bulli mining disaster of 1887, again a mere 27 years before the war. On ANZAC Day, I joined thousands of other locals at the dawn service at the Wollongong Cenotaph, as I've done for many years. And it was great to see thousands, some estimated close to 10,000 at that service, and 75 school children carry glow sticks through the arch of the cenotaph as the names of the 75 men on the memorial were read out. And later in the day, there was a great march through the streets of town and ending at Wollongong Wind Stadium, where we had a fantastic service as well. Performances by the Wollongong Bush Band and an address by Major General Horry Howard. There were services across the electorate, and I have to just finish by acknowledging the fantastic work of the Illawarra Centenary of ANZAC Committee, who also worked as my reference committee for the local grants program. And I want to thank them for their outstanding efforts. Chairman Mr Peter Poulton, Deputy Chair Major General Horry Howard, Secretary Mrs Mary Clark, and members of the committee, Ms Lee Kramer from Wollongong Council, Katrina Owers from Shellharbour Council, Councillor Dennis Sieg from Kiama Council, Mr Terry Weatherall, Mr Warwick Hanson, Mr Paul McInerney, Ms Deidre Backhouse, Mr Jerry Sozio, Ms Marissa O'Connor, Mr Keith Clement, Mr Jim Lyon and Mr Martin Parmenter. As we commemorate further centenary events as they arise over the coming years, I know the committee will be continuing its great work. On 3rd of May, I opened the World War I display at the Black Diamond Heritage Centre at Bulli with Lance Brown. Lance was 9 when he joined his family to meet his 2 uncles, Manny and Alf, at the train station when they returned from World War I. And this was another successful grant project that I was really pleased to be involved in unveiling. The work was undertaken with the Illawarra Family History Group, and they have an ongoing project on their Facebook identifying ANZACs on the 100th year since they lost their life in the conflict. It's a fantastic project, but a sad one, and it reminds us why we meet together on ANZAC commemorations, lest we forget.